and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we're going to continue our reading of Red Planet by Robert Heinlein. We have left the colonists trapped in a building, the school building from which our heroes recently escaped, while the corporation is trying to round up its bully boys and attack them. Chapter 11, Besieged. It was maddeningly true, as investigations soon proved. The front and back exits were covered by gunmen, Beecher's police supposedly, who were able to blast anyone emerging from the building without themselves being under fire. The airlock nature of the doors made a rush suicidal. The school was at a distance from the settlement's dwellings. It was not connected by tunnel, nor had it any windows. The colony listed hundreds of licensed gun wearers, and yet a handful of gunfighters outside could keep them holed up. Under the influence of Doc McRae's bellowing voice, the assembly got back to work. Before I go ahead, Marlowe announced, does anyone else want to surrender? I'm fairly sure that the Pottles were shot because they blundered out without notice. If you shout and wave something white, I think your surrender will be accepted. He waited. Presently, a man got up with his wife, and then another. A few more trickled out. They left in dead silence. When they were gone, Captain Marlowe went on with organizing. Mrs. Palmer he confirmed as head of commissary. Doc he designated as executive officer. Kelly he appointed officer of the watch, responsible for interior guard. Sutton and Toland were given the job of devising some sort of portable screen to block the enfilading fire that had dropped Mr. and Mrs. Pottle. Jim followed all this with excited interest until, after the appointment of platoon leaders, it became evident that his father did not intend to use boys as combatants. The students from the school were organized into two platoons designated as reserve and dismissed. Jim hung around trying to get a word with his father. At last he managed to catch his eye. Dad? Don't bother us now, Jim. But Dad, you told me to see you about getting the Martians to help us get to Copaeus. The Martians? Oh, Mr. Marlowe thought about it, then said, forget it, Jim. Until we can break out of here, neither that scheme nor any other will work. Go see how your mother is doing. Thus brushed off, Jim turned disconsolately away. As he was leaving, Frank fell in step with him. You know, Jim, sometimes you aren't as full of guff as you are at other times. Jim eyed him suspiciously. If that's a compliment, thanks. Not a compliment, Jim, merely justice. Seldom as I approve of your weary notions, this time I admit you had a bright idea. Quit making a speech and get to the point. Very well. Point. When you suggested getting the Martians to help us, you were firing on all jets. Huh? Well, thanks, but I don't see it myself. As Dad pointed out, there's nothing we can do about it until we can find some way to break out of here. Then I suppose we won't need their help. You're supposing too fast. Let's, as Doc would say, analyze the situation. In the first place, your father got us boxed in here. You lay off my father. I wasn't picking on your father. Your father is a swell guy, but by behaving like a gentleman, he got us cornered and we can't get out. I'm not blaming him, but that's the situation. So what are they going to do about it? Your old man tells my old man and that drip Toland to work out a shield, some sort of armor that will get us out the door and into the open where we can fight. Do you think they'll have any luck? Well, I hadn't thought about it. I have. They're going to get exactly no place. Dad is a good engineer. You give him equipment and materials and he'll build you anything. But what's he got to work with? He's got the school workshop, and you know what a sad mess that is. The company never spent any money on equipping it. It's about right for making bookends. Materials? What are they going to make a shield out of? Dining room tabletops? A heater would cut right through a tabletop like soft cheese. Oh, there must be something around they can use. You name it. Well, what do you want us to do? Jim said in exasperation. Surrender? Certainly not. The old folks are stuck in a rut. Here's where we show finesse, using your idea. Quit calling it my idea. I haven't got any idea. Okay, I'll take the credit. We get word to Gecko that we need help. He's our water friend. He'll see to it. How can Gecko help us? Martians don't fight. That's right, but as it says in geometry, what's the corollary? Human beings never fight Martians. Never. Beecher can't risk offending the Martians. Everybody knows what a terrible time the company had persuading the Martians it was all right to let us settle here in the first place. Now, suppose that about 20 or 30 Martians, or even one, came stomping up to the front door of this place. What's Beecher's cops going to do? Huh? They cease fire, that's what, and we come swarming out. That's what Gecko can do for us. He can fix it so that Beecher is forced to call off his gun toters. He'll have to. Jim thought about it. There was certainly merit in it. Every human who set foot on Mars had it thoroughly drummed into him that the natives must not be interfered with, provoked, nor their customs violated, nor, above all things, hurt. The strange and distressing history of the first generation of contact with the Martians had resulted in this being the first law of the settlements on Mars. Jim could not imagine Beecher violating this rule, nor could he imagine the company police doing so. In normal times, the principal duty of the police was the enforcement of this rule, particularly with respect to tourists from Earth who were never allowed to come in contact with natives. There's just one thing wrong, Frank. Suppose Gecko and his friends were willing, how are we going to let him know we need help? We can't just call him on the phone. No, we can't. But that is where you come in. You can send a message. How? Willis. You're crazy. Am I? Suppose you go out that front door. You are done for. But suppose Willis goes out. Who's going to shoot a bouncer? I don't like it. Willis might get hurt. If we just sit tight and do nothing, you'll wish he was dead. Beecher will sell him to the London Zoo. Jim considered this, then answered, Anyhow, your scheme is full of holes. Even if he gets outside safely, Willis couldn't find Gecko and couldn't be depended on to deliver a message. He'd be just as likely to sing or recite some of Doc's bum jokes. I've got a better idea. Convince me. I'll bet that Beecher's plug uglies didn't think to keep watch on the garbage dump. I'll deliver the message to Gecko myself. Frank thought about it. No good. Even if they aren't watching the dump, they can see you from where they're watching the back door. They'll nail you before you could scramble to your feet. I'll wait till dark. Could work. Only I'll do it. I'm faster on my feet than you are. Look who's talking. All right, we'll both do it. An hour apart. Frank went on, but that doesn't cut Willis out of it. He'll try it too. One of us might get through. Now, wait a minute. You underrate your little pal. We'll teach him just what he's to say. Then you tell him to go over into the native city, stop the first Martian he meets, and recite his piece. The Martian does the rest because we'll put it all into the message. The only question is whether or not Willis is bright enough to do as you tell him. I've got grave doubts about that. Jim bristled. You're always trying to make out that Willis is stupid. He's not. You just don't understand him. Okay, then he can find his way over to the city and deliver the message. Or can't he? Well, I don't like it. Which do you prefer, to take a small risk with Willis or to have your mother and your baby brother have to spend the winter at South Colony? Jim chewed his lip. All right, we'll try it. Let's get Willis. Don't get in a rush. Neither you nor I know the native language well enough to whip up just what we want to say, but Doc does. He'll help us. He's the only one of the grown-ups I'd trust with this anyhow. Come on. They found McCrae, but were not able to speak with him at once. He was in the communications booth, bellowing at the screen. They could hear his half of the conversation. I want to talk to Doc Rawlings. Well, get him. Don't sit there chewing your pencil. Tell him it's Doc McCrae. Ah, good day, Doctor. No, I just got here. How's business, Doctor? Still cremating your mistakes? Well, don't we all? Sorry, I can't. I'm locked up. Locked up, I said. Locked, up, like a disorderly drunk. None, no reason at all. It's that simian moron Beecher. Yes, hadn't you heard? The entire colony penned up in the schoolhouse. Shoots us down if we so much as stick our noses out. No, I'm not joking. You know Skinny Pottle? He and his wife were killed not 2 hours ago. Come see for yourself and find out what kind of madman you have running the place here. The screen suddenly went blank. McCrae swore and fiddled with the controls. Presently, by experiment, he realized the instrument had been cut off completely. He came out shrugging. Well, they finally caught on to me, he remarked in the room in general, but I talked to 3 key men. What were you doing, Doc? Asked Jim. Starting some fifth column activity behind Beecher's lines. There's some good people everywhere, son, but you have to spell it out for them. Oh, look, Doc, could you spare some time? What for? Your father has a number of things for me to do, Jim. This is important. They got McRae aside and explained to him their plans. McRae looked thoughtful. Might just work. That notion of making use of Martian immunity is brilliant, Frank. You should go into politics. However, about the other stunt, the Garbage Can Paratrooper Act. If you ask your father, he'll veto it. Can't you ask him? He'll listen to you. I said, if you ask your father. Oh, I get you. About the other matter, chase up the little beastie and meet me in classroom C. I'm using it as an office. Jim and Frank left to do so. Jim found his mother and Oliver asleep, his sister and Willis gone. He had started to leave when his mother woke up. Jimmy? I didn't mean to wake you, Mother. Where's Phil? I want to find Willis. Your sister's in the kitchen, I think, helping out. Isn't Willis here? He was here on the bed with Baby and me. Jim looked again but found no sign of Willis. I'll go ask Phil. Maybe she came back and got him. He can't have wandered far. I'm sorry, Jim. I'll find him. He went to the kitchen and found his sister. How would I know? She protested. He was with Mother when I left. Don't go looking at me. Jim joined Frank. Darn it, we let him wander off. We'll just have to search. 1 hour and hundreds of inquiries later, they were convinced that if the bouncer was in the school, he had found a very special hiding place. Jim was so annoyed that he had forgotten completely the essential danger that they were all in. That's what comes of trusting women, he said bitterly. Frank, what'll I do now? Search me. They were in the far end of the building from their former room. They started back toward it on the chance that Willis might have come back. As they were passing through the entrance hall, Jim stopped suddenly. I heard him. They both listened. Open up, came a replica of Jim's voice. Let Willis in. The voice came through the door's announcing speaker. Jim darted for the pressure lock, was stopped by the guard. Hey, he protested, open the lock, that's Willis. More likely a trap, stand back. Let him in, that's Willis, I tell you. The guard ignored him, but threw the switch that caused the lock to cycle. He cleared everybody out of range, then watched the door from one side, gun drawn. The inner door opened, and Willis waddled through. Willis was bland about the whole thing. Jim, go away. Everybody go away. Willis, go for walk. How did you get outdoors? Went out. But how? Willis apparently could see nothing difficult about that. He did not amplify. Maybe he went out when the Pottles did, suggested Frank. Maybe. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. Go see people, Willis offered. He named off a string of native names, then added, Fine time, water friends, give Willis good water, big drink. He made lip smacking noises in imitation of Jim, although he had no lips himself. You had a drink just a week ago, Jim said accusingly. Willis, good boy, Willis countered. Wait a minute, said Frank. He was with Martians. Huh? I don't care if he was Cleopatra. He shouldn't have run away. But don't you see? He can get to the natives. He already has. All we've got to do is be sure he carries a message for them to pass on to Gecko. The point, relayed to McRae, increased his interest. The three composed a message in English for McRae to translate. Greetings, it began. This is a message from Jim Marlowe, water friend of Gecko of the city of. Here they inserted the unspellable and almost unpronounceable Martian name of Cinia. Whoever you may be, friend of my friend, you are implored to send this word at once to Gecko. I am in great trouble and I need your help. The message went on to tell the nature of the trouble, who was responsible, and what they hoped would be done about it. Telegraphic simplicity was not attempted, since Willis' nervous system could hold 1,000 words as easily as 10. McRae translated it, then drilled Jim in reading it, after which they attempted to impress on Willis what he was to do. Willis was willing, but his consistently slap-happy, feather-brained approach to any problem exasperated them almost to hysteria. At last, it seemed likely that he might carry out his assignment, at least A, when asked what he was to do, he would answer, go see friends, and B, when asked what he would tell them, he would, usually, answer by reciting the message. It might work, decided McRae. We know the Martians have means of rapid communication, even though we've never known what sort. If our plump friend doesn't forget what he's doing and why he's making the trip. Jim took him to the front door. On McRae's authorization, the guard let them through. Jim checked Willis again while the lock was cycling. The bouncer appeared to be sure of his instructions, although his answers showed his usual mental leapfrog. Jim hung back in the doorway out of the line of fire while Willis rolled off the stoop. The pottles still lay where they had fallen. Willis looked at them, then took a zigzag course down the street and disappeared from Jim's view, cut off as he was by the doorframe. Jim wished then that he had had the foresight to bring along a mirror to use as a periscope. Finally, he screwed up his courage, lay down, and peeked around the edge of the door at the bottommost part. Willis was well down the street, and nothing had happened to him. Far down the street, some sort of a cover had been set up. Jim stuck his head out an inch farther, trying to see what it was, but the corner of the door frame above him gave off a puff of smoke, and he felt the electric tingle of a near miss. He jerked his head back and re entered the lock. He had an all gone feeling at the pit of his stomach and a conviction that he would never see Willis again. Chapter 12. Don't shoot. The day passed wearily for Jim and Frank. There was nothing they could do about their own plan until after dark. In the meantime, discussions were taking place among the colonial leaders, but they were held behind closed doors and the boys were not invited. Supper was welcome diversion, both because they were hungry and because it meant that the kitchen would presently be deserted and the way left open to the garbage dump. Or so they thought. They found that in practice, the womenfolk running the kitchen first took a leisurely time to clean up, then seemed disposed to sit around all night drinking coffee and talking. The boys found excuses to come into the kitchen, excuses which began to arouse Mrs. Palmer's suspicions. Finally, Jim followed another boy in, wondering what he would say this time, when he heard the other boy say, "Mrs. Palmer, Captain Marlowe wants to know if it will be too much trouble to keep a night watch for coffee and sandwiches for the men on guard." "Why, no," Jim heard her say. "We'll be glad to. Henrietta, will you find some volunteers? I'll take the first stint." Jim backed out and went to where Frank awaited him. "What's the chances?" asked Frank. "Does it look like they're going to break up any time soon?" Jim told him what the chances were, or rather were not. Frank swore, using a couple of words that Jim had not heard before. "What'll we do, Jim?" "I don't know. Maybe it's down to just one of them. She'll go out occasionally. Maybe we could get her out with some song and dance. Maybe we could tell her that she's wanted in headquarters. That ought to do it." They were still discussing it when the lights went out. The place was suddenly as dark as the inside of a rock. Worse than that, there was a disturbing silence. Jim had just realized that the complete emptiness of sound resulted from the ending of the noise of circulating air, from the stopping of the supercharger on the roof, when a woman began to scream. She was joined by another in a higher key. Then there were voices everywhere in the darkness, questioning, complaining, soothing. Down the hall, a light sprang out, and Jim heard his father's voice. "Quiet, everybody. It's just a power failure. Be patient." The light moved toward them, suddenly hit them. "You boys get to bed." Jim's father moved on. In the other direction, they could hear Doc's bellow, ordering people to shut up and calm down. Jim's father came back. This time he was saying, "Into your suits, everybody. Have your respirators on your head. We hope to correct this in a few minutes, but we don't want anybody hurt. Don't get excited. This building will hold pressure for half an hour at least. Plenty of time to get ready for thin air, even if it takes a while to correct the trouble." Other lights sprang up. Shortly, the passageways throughout the building, if not the rooms, were adequately lighted. The corridors were crowded with dim shapes struggling into their outdoor suits. Jim and Frank, planning as they were to attempt to go outside, had long been in their suits, armed and with respirators at the ready. "Maybe this is a good time," suggested Frank. "No," Jim answered. "They're still in the kitchen. I can see a light." McCrae came down the corridor. Jim stopped him. "Doc, how long do you think it'll be until they get the lights on?" McCrae said, "Are you kidding?" "What do you mean, Doc?" "This is one of Beecher's stunts. He pulled the switch on us at the powerhouse." "Are you sure?" "There's no failure. We've checked it. I'm surprised Beecher didn't do it hours ago. But don't you birds go blabbing, Jim. Your pop has his hands full keeping the nervous Nellies from blowing their tops." He moved on. In spite of Captain Marlowe's reassuring words, the true state of things was soon common knowledge. The pressure dropped slowly, so slowly that it was necessary to warn everyone to adjust his respirator lest oxygen starvation sneak up on the unwary. After that, it was hardly possible to maintain the fiction that the power loss was temporary, to be corrected any minute now. The temperature in the building fell slowly. There was no danger of them freezing in the closed and insulated building, but the night chill penetrated. Marlowe set up headquarters in the entrance hall in a circle of light cast by a single torch. Jim and Frank loitered there, discreetly back in the shadows, unwilling to miss what might be going on, and quite unwilling to go to bed as ordered. As Frank pointed out to Jim, the only beds they had were occupied by Mrs. Marlowe, Phyllis, and Oliver. Neither of them had given up the idea of attempting the garbage chute route, but they knew in their hearts that the place was too stirred up to give them the privacy they would require. Joseph Hartley, one of the colonists' Joseph Hartley, one of the colonists' hydroponists, came up to Marlowe. His wife was behind him, carrying their baby daughter in a pressurized crib, its supercharger sticking up above the clear plastic shell of it like a chimney. Mr. Marlowe, I mean Captain Marlowe, yes? You've got to do something. Our kid can't stand this. She's coming down with croup and we can't get at her to help her. McCrae crowded forward. You should have brought her to me, Joe. He looked the baby over through the plastic, then announced, the kid seems to be doing all right. She's sick, I tell you. Can't make much of an examination when I can't get at her. Can't take her temperature, but she doesn't seem to be in any real danger. You're just trying to soothe me down, Hartley said angrily. You can't tell anything about it when she's in a sealed crib. Sorry, son, the doctor answered. A lot of good it does to be sorry. Somebody's got to do something. This can't. His wife plucked at his sleeve. He turned away and they went into a huddle. Shortly, he turned back. Captain Marlowe. Yes, Mr. Hartley. The rest of you can do as you like. I've had enough. I've got my wife and baby to think about. The decision is yours, Marlowe said stiffly and turned away in abrupt dismissal. But, said Hartley, and stopped, aware that Marlowe was no longer paying any attention to him. He looked uncertain, like a man who wants someone to argue him out of his resolution. His wife touched his arm. He turned then, and they went together to the front entrance. Marlowe said to McCrae, What do they expect of me? Miracles? McCrae answered, Exactly, boy. Most people never grow up. They expect Papa to get 'em the pretty moon. The doctor went on. Just the same, Joe accidentally told the truth. We've got to do something. I don't see what we can do until Sutton and Tolan get some results. You can't wait any longer for them, son. We've got to crash out of here anyway. Theoretically, a man can live for days in a respirator. Practically, it won't work, and that's what Beecher's counting on. You can't keep several hundred people crouching here in the dark and the cold wearing masks to stay alive. Not indefinitely. You're going to have a panic on your hands. Marlowe looked weary even through his mask. We can't tunnel out. We can't get out at all except through the doors, and they've got those doors zeroed. It's suicide. It's got to be done, son. I'll lead the rush. Marlowe sighed. No, I will. You've got a wife and kids. I've got nobody, and I've been living on borrowed time so long I've lost track. It's my privilege. That settles it. We'll see. I said that settles it, sir. The argument was left unfinished. The inner door to the pressure lock opened again, and Mrs. Hartley stumbled inside. She was clutching the tiny crib and sobbing wildly. It was the case of the Pottles and the Gibbs all over again. When McCrae was able to make something out of her sobs, it appeared that they had been very cautious, had waited, had shouted their intention to surrender, and had displayed a light. There had been no answer, so they had shouted again. Then Hartley had stepped off the threshold with his hands up and his wife shining the light on him. He had been struck down as soon as he stepped out the door. McCrae turned her over to the women, then went out to reconnoiter. He came back in almost at once. Somebody get me a chair, he demanded, and looked around. You, Jim, skedaddle. What's up? Asked Marlowe. Let you know in a moment. I suspect something. Be careful. That's why I want the chair. Jim came back with one. The doctor went through the pressure lock again. He came back in about 5 minutes. It's booby trapped, he stated. What do you mean? Beecher didn't try to keep men outdoors all night. At least I don't think so. It's automatic. They put an electric eye grid across the door. When you break it, a bolt comes across, right where you'd be if you walked through it. He displays half a dozen deep burns through the chair. Marlowe examined them. But that's not the important point, McRae went on. It's automatic, but it's inflexible. It hits about 2 feet above the step and about 4 feet. A man could crawl through it if his nerves were steady. Marlowe straightened up. Show me. They came back with the chair still more burned in a few minutes. Kelly, Marlowe said briskly, I want 20 volunteers to make a sortie. Pass the word around. There were at least 200 volunteers. The problem was to weed them down. Both Frank and Jim tried to get in on it. Jim's father refused to take any but grown, unmarried men, except himself. McRae, he refused. The doctor pulled Jim back and whispered to him, Hold your horses. In a few minutes, I'll be boss. The raiding party started into the lock. Marlowe turned to McRae. We'll head for the power plant. If we're gone more than 2 hours, you are on your own. He went into the lock and closed the door. As soon as the door was closed, McRae said, Okay, 20 more volunteers. Kelly said, Aren't you going to wait 2 hours? You tend to your knitting. When I'm out of here, you're in charge. He turned and nodded to Jim and Frank. You two come along. McRae had his party in short order, had apparently selected them in his mind before Marlowe left. They filed into the lock. Once the outer door was open, McRae flashed his torch into the street. The Pottles and the unfortunate Joseph Haley lay where they had fallen, but no other bodies littered the street. McRae turned around and said, Give me that chair. I'll demonstrate the gimmick. He stuck it out into the door. Instantly, two bolts cut across the doorway parallel to the ground. After they were gone and the eye was still dazzled by their brilliance, two soft violet paths of ionization marked where they had been and then gradually dispersed. You will note, the doctor said as if he were lecturing medical students, that it does not matter where the chair is inserted. He again shoved the chair into the opening, moved it up and down. The bolts repeated at split-second intervals, but always at the same places, about knee-high and chest-high. I think it is best, continued the doctor, to maintain the attack. Then you can see where you are. First man. Jim gulped and stepped forward, or was shoved, he was not sure which. He eyed the deadly fence, stooped over, and with awkward and infinite care stepped through. He went out into the street. Get moving, the doctor ordered. Spread out. Jim ran up the street, feeling very much alone but terribly excited. He paused short of the end of the building and cautiously looked around the corner. Nothing either way. He stopped and waited in the darkness, ready to blast anything that moved. Ahead of him and to the left, he could see the curious structure which had almost cost him the top of his head many hours before. It was clear now that the bolts were coming from it. Someone came up behind him. He whirled and heard a voice yelp, Don't shoot! It's me, Frank! How about the others? They're coming, I think. A light flashed in the building ahead beyond the shield from which the bolts came. Frank said, I think somebody came out there. Can you see him? Do you think we ought to shoot? I don't know. Someone else was pounding up the street behind them. Up ahead, from near the spot where Frank had thought he had seen a man, a heater flashed out in the darkness. The beam passed them. Jim's gun answered by pure reflex. He nailed the spot from which the flash had come. You got him, said Frank. Good boy. I did? Said Jim. How about the guy behind me? He found he was trembling. Here he is now. Who shot at me? The newcomer said. Where are they? Nowhere at the moment, Frank answered. Jim nailed him. Frank tried to peer into the mask. The night was too dark. Who is it? Smitty. Both Frank and Jim gave exclamations of surprise. It was Smythe, the practical man. Don't look at me like that, Smythe said defensively. I came along at the last minute to protect my investment. You guys owe me money. I think Jim just paid it off, suggested Frank. Not on your life. That's another matter entirely. Later, said Frank. Others were coming up. Presently, McRae came puffing up and roared, I told you bird brains to spread out. He caught his breath and said, We tackle the company main offices, dog trot, and don't bunch together. Doc, said Jim, there's some in that building up ahead. Some what? Somebody that shoots at us, that's what. Oh, hold it, everybody. McRae gave them hoarse instructions, then said, Got it, everybody? Doc, asked Frank, how about that gun over there? Why don't we wreck it first? I must be getting old, McRae said. Anybody here enough of a technician to sneak up on it and pull its teeth? The faceless figure in the darkness volunteered. Go ahead, Doc told him. We'll cover for you here. The colonial trotted ahead, swung around behind the shield covering the stationary automatic blaster, and stopped. He worked away for several minutes, then there was a white flash, intensely bright. He trotted back. Shorted it out. Bet I blew every overload breaker in the powerhouse. Sure you fixed it? You couldn't dot an I with it now. Okay, you. McRae grabbed one of his squad by the arm. Tear back and tell Kelly. You, he indicated the chap who had wrecked the gun. Go around and back and see what you can do with the setup back there. You guys cover him. The rest of you follow me. The building ahead according to plan. Jim's assignment called for sneaking along the face of the building and taking a covering position about 20 feet short of the doorway. His way led him over the ground where the man had been at whom he had shot. There was no body on the pavement. He wondered if he had missed. It was too dark to look for blood. McRae gave his covering troops time to reach their stations, then made a frontal assault with 6 to back him up, among them Frank. The doctor himself walked up to the building entrance, tried the outer door. It opened. Motioning the assault group to join him, he went in. The outer door of the building's lock closed on them. Jim huddled against the icy wall, eyes wide, ready to shoot. It seemed a cold eternity that he waited. He began to fancy he could see some traces of dawn in the east. At last he saw silhouettes ahead, raised his gun, then identified one as Doc's portly figure. McRae had the situation in hand. There were 4 disarmed prisoners. One was being half carried by 2 others. Take him back to the school, Doc ordered one of his group. Shoot the first one of them that makes a funny move. And tell whoever's in charge back there now to lock him up. Come on, men, we've got our real job ahead. There came a shout from behind them. McRae turned. Kelly's voice called, Doc, wait for us. He came running up and demanded, What are the plans? Behind him, men were pouring out of the school and up the street. McRae took a few minutes to recast things on the basis of more guns. One of the platoon leaders, a civil engineer named Alvarez, was left in charge at the school with orders to maintain a guard outside the building and to patrol the neighborhood with scouts. Kelly was assigned the task of capturing the communications building which lay between the settlement and the spaceport. It was an important key to controlling the whole situation since it housed not only the local telephone exchange, but also the radio link to Deimos and thence to all other outposts on Mars, and also the radar beacons and other aids for incoming ships from Earth. McRae reserved for himself the job of taking the planet office, the main offices on Mars of the company, Beecher's own headquarters. The resident agent general's personal apartment was part of the same building. The doctor expected to come to grips with Beecher himself. McRae sent a squad of men to reinforce Marlowe at the powerhouse, then called out, Let's go before we all freeze to death. Chop, chop. He led the way at a ponderous trot. Jim located Frank in the group and joined him. What took you guys so long in that building? He asked. Was there a fight? Took so long, said Frank. We weren't inside 2 minutes. But you must have cut out that chatter back there, called out Doc. Jim shut up and pondered it. McRae had them cross the main canal on ice, avoiding the arching bridge as a possible trap. They crossed in pairs, those behind covering those crossing. In turn, those who had crossed spread out and covered those yet to come. The crossing held a nightmarish slow motion quality. While on the ice, a man was a perfect target, yet it was impossible to hurry. Jim longed for his skates. On the far side, the doctor gathered them together in the shadow of a warehouse. We'll swing around to the east and avoid the dwellings, he told them in a hoarse whisper. From here on, quiet for your life. We won't split up because I don't want you shooting each other in the dark. He set forth a plan to surround the building and cover all exits, while McRae himself and about half their number tried to force an entrance at the main door. When you get around and back and make contact, McRae warned the 2 who were to lead the flanking and covering moves, you may have one deuce of a time telling friend from foe. Be careful. The word is Mars. The answer is freedom. Jim was in the assault party. Doc stationed 6 of them in the fan shape around the door at an easy 25 yards range and had them take cover where available. 3 of them were on the open ramp in front of the door. He had them lie down and steady their guns. In case of doubt, shoot, he instructed them. Come on, the rest of you. Jim was included in the last order. McCrae walked up to the outer door and tried it. It was locked. He pressed the signal switch and waited. Nothing happened. McCrae pressed the switch again and called out mildly to the speaker grill, "Let me in. I have an important message for the resident." Still nothing happened. McCrae changed his tone to pretended exasperation. "Hurry up, please. I'm freezing to death out here." The door remained dark and silent. McCrae changed his manner to belligerence. "Okay, Beecher, open up. We've got the place surrounded. We're ready to blast in the door. You have 30 seconds till we set off the charge." The seconds ticked away. Doc muttered to Jim, "I wish it were the truth," then raised his voice and said, "Time's up, Beecher. This is it." The door hissed as the compressed air in the lock began to escape to the outside. The lock was starting to cycle. McCrae motioned them back a little. They waited, not breathing, all guns drawn, and aimed at the point where the door would begin to open. Then it was open, and a single figure stood in it, the lock's light shining behind him. "Don't shoot," said a firm, pleasant voice. "It's all right. It's all over." McCrae peered at the figure. "Why, Dr. Rawlings," he said, "bless your ugly face." And we'll find out why it's all over next time.